my name is Sabrina, and I would like to talk to you about a book that is called History of the Concept of Time by Martin Heidegger. A recap, the introduction, paragraphs 1 through 3. Heidegger says the goal is to see nature and history in a new way. He wants to get away from the lens of science, that is, to dispense with the conceptualizations and terms through which nature and history are usually analyzed. If we're going to get rid of scientific conceptualizations and terms, what should we do instead? What then should we look at in the context of nature and history? What should we see it together with? Time. Sounds a little strange at first, right? Time. Why would that be? He says both nature and history are, and I'm going to quote here in German, Ablaufszusammenhänge in der Zeit. An Ablauf is a process or a sequence of things happening, and Zusammenhang is a connection. In that case, we can say both nature and history are connected processes that are happening within time. And therefore, we should look at nature and history through the lens of time. We can now go to the preliminary part, meaning and task of phenomenological research. Chapter 1 in this section, paragraph 4, and the title of chapter 1 is Development and First Breakthrough of Phenomenological Research. What he does in this part of the book, chapter 1, paragraph 4, he is talking about what science and philosophy were doing, how they were changing in the second half of the 19th century. To give you that development in a nutshell as he lays it out, he said in the second half of the 19th century, what happened is that both philosophy and history turn towards facts. You will find this on page 14 of the German version. What does that mean more specifically? In philosophy, that meant a turn towards materialism. The idea that at the heart of everything is really matter, physicality, chemicals, atoms, you name it. For instance, an example would be even our moods, right? You could say this is all based on the chemicals that are coursing around in our bodies. So if you have a lot of dopamine, you're gonna feel pretty good. Whereas if that gets out of balance, well, not so good. In history, there was also, Heidegger says, a turn to facts. And in that case, when we're talking about history, he says facts are source materials, things that documents from the time, letters, ancient books, quotes, source materials. Now, the problem with that is, of course, as he points out, the historians then looked at these source materials and interpreted them. Now, of course, whenever you interpret something, that opens doors to all sorts of points of views. How can you say, okay, this is my interpretation? How can you then say this is a fact? Is a fact seen through the lens of somebody's point of view? And there are, of course, different prevailing views at different times, but also different researchers have different angles. You could, of course, look at documents from a point of view of culture, politics, feminism, you name it. And the interpretation, of course, will be different in each case. Let me go back to the idea of processes in time both in nature and in history. On the one hand, it's pretty obvious, right, that both nature and history have time at their core. You couldn't have processes in nature and processes in history without considering time at all. Therefore, I would like to give you an example. In nature, very simple example. You plant a seed, let's say a green pepper seed. The plant grows, the plant blooms, and blossoms are developing into peppers. Of course, a process within time. History, and this is the common denominator, time, between history and nature. In history, of course, you also have processes. And an example of that would be two countries negotiate a treaty, let's say about trade. A treaty gets signed after the negotiations, and then measures get implemented. For instance, reduced tariffs, better trade conditions, things like that. So remember, the key point here is we want to look at history and nature through the lens of time. Time is crucial for both nature and for history. We can't really have either without them. And what that all means, you will get into in the following chapters.